It's April 28th, 2021, and we have Primal on the show to talk about his career path through esports, the Mid-Season Invitational, the LCS, and more. This is the True Sight Podcast. Welcome to the True Sight Podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen, and my guest today is Kaizen Primal Asiedu, a new member of the LCS analyst desk this year. Welcome to the show, Primal.
Thank you. And you said my name 90% correctly, so I'm impressed. That was like first try.
That is a level. I didn't even ask you beforehand, which I probably should have, but just ran with it.
That was good, man. That was really
90.
good.
That's an A. That's in some grading schemas. That's an A plus. So
Yeah, no, that's solid.
not an S, but those don't exist. So I'm really excited to have you on the show. I think you're someone who's been around the esports space and the League of Legends space for a long time, but not necessarily in the spotlight as much as you have been coming in this year and joining the analyst desk. Having your face there, having a different voice and a different take on things, which has been great to see. But looking forward to getting to know a little more about you and your career and what you're bringing into the space. So why don't we just start off with that? Why don't you just kind of introduce yourself and specifically about kind of your background in esports and how you came to where you are today?
Yeah, so it's funny. I'm realizing now that I should have done some sort of introductory, who the hell am I? Because I'm just some guy who just popped up on the LCS broadcast one day. So this is the who the hell am I? So I've been, a gamer my whole life, and I've been in esports for around 10 years. I started off when I was in college. It was like after my sophomore year, or maybe it was my junior year. I got really into StarCraft 2. And I got into it as a player. I was a Protoss player, reached Masters of Protoss, was bored that summer, and was like, I need to do something with my time. And this is my first introduction to esports through StarCraft 2. So I noticed that there weren't a lot of online tournaments that were being done at a particularly high level. So I started organizing tournaments for fun and posted about them on the StarCraft subreddit. And one thing led to another. Those tournaments got momentum. I was a moderator of the StarCraft subreddit. And then we did a bunch of invitationals, and I think for the time had some pretty elevated production levels and gained some credibility in the space. Turned that into a company called Well Played that did tournament production for different companies, so like MLG, IGN, and we did our own events as well. It was during running Well Played that my friends who I was played with got switched from StarCraft to League of Legends. And at first, being a StarCraft person, I don't know if people remember what sort of the community narratives were, but I was like, oh, this is like a casual game. Like, why would I play League of Legends?
Compared to StarCraft, just about anything is a casual game.
Yeah, right. So I was like, okay, well, my friends are playing it. I want to play games with them, so I'll try it. I tried it. I was like, holy wait, this game is actually amazing. Got super hooked. Started producing League of Legends tournaments. And then after my junior year, I took some time off from school. Part of that time was spent interning at Riot. So they liked me enough to invite me back full-time. I joined Riot in 2014 full-time after interning in 2013. And by that time, I was a pretty high-level player. I almost reached Challenger. I was like 4 points off. I was equivalent of like Grandmaster, I guess. There wasn't a Grandmaster back then. It was Masters, but the equivalent.
Yeah.
As pretty much a Hecarim one-trick. I played other stuff too. Like I think the first champ I reached high elo with was Skarner. And then I think it was like primarily J4. And then I really, really got into playing Hecarim off of watching XJ9, who's like a name that I don't know if people even know anymore, and it's kind of toxic.
Yeah.
But I digress. So yeah, I was just I logged thousands and thousands of hours primarily playing Hecarim, which is kind of troubling in hindsight. I was like, how the hell did I play this champion so much? And yeah, then I worked at Riot full time, and I started off by doing league operations, so crafting tournament formats, rules, disciplinary policy, that kind of stuff for the North American LCS and for global. And then I transitioned fully into doing global. And to give you some examples of the kinds of things I would do in league operations, I put in place the import rule that we know and love these days. I put in place the appeals process for like reviewing players who are banned and like giving them a path to becoming unbanned so that they could play in the league, not for the game but for the sport. And then worked on things like designing the worlds, qualification system, and MSI format, etc. And then somewhere around, I think it was 2016, I started producing events. So the first event I led the production of was MSI in 2016, the amazing CLG run. They'll forever live on my memory. Yeah. And then I ran Worlds 2017, and then I ran the 2018 events, starting with Worlds as the leader of the global events team. And then I did that for around a year and a half, 2 years before I left Riot last year, which is crazy. It's almost a year ago exactly. Partially to just explore and like discover, because I had been at Riot for pretty much 7 years at that point, and I wanted to just do something new. And partially to become a pro gamer. So I hit Challenger in TFT, was super obsessed with that game. That was like probably the second most played game of all time after League of Legends for me. So I was like, well, what the hell? Like, might as well like see where this can go. Because one of my regrets, not that I'd really tried that hard to go pro, but one of my regrets with League of Legends was not actually making a focused effort to go pro. Now, there are all sorts of confounding variables. Like, I was like really depressed in college and dealing with a bunch of stuff. But when I hit Challenger in TFT, I was like, hey, this would be like a fun thing to explore. Like, who knows where it's going to go? So I spent a lot of last year being a competitor and streamer, and then I started commentating TFT events as well. So I commentated, was it the first TFT World Championship? I think it was the first one they did. And then from that, Riot obviously knew me from working there, even though I hadn't worked with the broadcast team in North America directly. They knew me from, I had been there a long time and interacted with a lot of people. And I think when they saw me commentating TFT, they're like, hey, this guy is good on camera. We think he can bring a unique take and unique energy to the LCS broadcast. So now I'm an LCS commentator.
It's quite the journey, and that it raises, a lot of different things that I'd love to talk about. And I think, I want to focus on kind of League of Legends stuff and things that you're into right now. But, I think there are a couple of paths that I'd love to learn a little more about. Like, were you involved with Nick Allen on the disciplinary stuff? Because that's what a lot of people, all the OGs are going to remember. So did he take take the face for a lot of the work you did?
He did. He was my manager, actually. He was my boss for my first few years at Riot, and he was great. I really like Nick.
He's a nice guy.
I have a great friendship with him. It's funny because I was like, I was very, being young and like hot-headed. I was like, we need to get import rules now. We need to like change disciplinary structure now. And for the time, these are like controversial things.
Yeah.
They weren't like no-brainers like we might consider them now. And Nick, being like the great manager that he was willing to be the person who went to bat for these policies and was willing to, be the person to take public heat. So yeah, I'm really grateful to Nick. He's an awesome dude.
Yeah, it brings up a lot of memories of the competitive ruling on Hotshot GG,
yes.
and, stuff like that. A lot of memes were made.
I wrote a lot of those competitive rulings.
Cool.
When Nick was the one who had to get memed for it.
Yeah, and so there's the Nick Allen connection then, and then the CLG at MSI connection then. And I'm starting to draw the thread to your CLG fandom, which I believe is the case, right?
Yeah, so I mean, my CLG fandom goes way back. I don't even. I mean, I think the first time I realized I was a CLG fan it was actually
realized.
Realized. Right?
I love the way you put that.
So it was actually Chowster. This is like way back in the day. I think on the CLG forums, he had this like 100-page long AMA thread where people would just ask him stuff about the game, and I was like, wow, this dude is like he thinks so deeply about the game. And this is a guy who was like thinking about wave management and stuff like that before they were even concepts really. And I think through that, I just became attracted to the brand, and I thought CLG just had the most interesting cast of characters at the time. And from there, I just stuck with the team. I mean, for me, part of my self-concept is once I'm a fan, I'm going to be a fan for life. So even though the players changed and, people argue, okay, what's the point of being fans of a brand? It's not geolocated. Well, I mean, even if something's geolocated, like I'm from New York, right? That's still arbitrary, right? The fact that by dint of luck, I happen to be born in the same place that some corporate brand is
Yeah.
sponsoring a basketball team doesn't mean I have to be a fan of that team. So I was like, all fandom is arbitrary. Why not just commit here? So
Sure.
I've been a CLG fan ever since.
Yeah, I think that's similar to my story on the path to me becoming a Curse fan back in 2013, and then drawing that through to Team Liquid was in my case it was because I played a ton of Diablo 2.
Oh, cool. Me too.
And there was a community forum, diabloii.net, that became part of the Curse website network. And so I'm like, oh, Curse, they ran this, this forum that I spent hundreds of hours on, thousands of hours on. And so they then sponsored a league team. I'm like, I'm no better place to start. And also I think it was because I didn't want to be a fan of one of the top two teams, and they were like always third, fourth. I'm like, yeah, they can, I want to be aspirational with my fandom a little bit. I don't want to just, bandwagon the number one team. So no TSM for me.
Good for you. Yeah. Wait, so does that mean transitively you're a Team Liquid fan? Because that was basically the precursor to Team
Yeah, I
Liquid.
followed that through for a long time. I'm much less a fan of an individual team at this point. Once I got into it and was actually covering things and trying to create content around it all, try to spread my appreciation around a little more broadly. But yeah, I definitely carried through into the Team Liquid side. So,
Dude, but if you were a Curse fan, you gotta like harvest the reward of being a Curse fan, and now Team Liquid's an actually really good team.
yep.
So I think you get that credit. You helped.
It wasn't. Yeah, I definitely didn't bandwagon TL fandom. That's for sure.
Yeah, there you go.
It was a long journey. Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like you've been in touch in a lot of different places in this. And I believe that led to you being part of winning an Emmy, right?
Yeah. So I think technically, I feel like I should call myself two-time winner because we actually won one for Worlds 2017. But the way the I guess Emmy Academy or whatever the body is awarded things was they were only willing to actually give production credits to people who are in the broadcast discipline, right? So like broadcast producers. Whereas so even though I led the whole event, I didn't technically get a production credit, but the event won, so I was like, that's mine, damn it.
Yeah, sure.
But then
Fair enough.
and then but in 2020, I was formally credited for the production credit because I guess it changed the criteria for the 2019 World Championship. So that felt cool to get an Emmy. That's certainly not what I expected to come out of my esports journey.
Yeah, definitely something awesome to be able to say that you've been part of, though. So here you are. You're now on the analyst desk. You're now on broadcast. You've had this journey in TFT as well, and I guess that's another rabbit hole we could go down a little bit with the new TFT set just officially launched today, right? I've tried out a couple of games in it. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I have no idea what's going on yet, but we'll steer that clear for another conversation another time. From all that stuff, before we move on, is there anything that really jumped out at you, like the great experience you mentioned MSG and being there for that and all the world's things? Like, what are some of the couple, maybe the favorite stories and absolute most memorable moments?
So I think one of my most memorable moments, just like geeking out as a fan, was I think this was Worlds. This might have been Worlds 2014. I think we might have been in Taiwan. So this was at the time when Imp and Uzi were still both playing, and they faced off against each other in, this might have been like a quarterfinal matchup or something like that. And there was a moment where Uzi, and it's funny, Uzi's my dog's name. Also.
Yeah.
I wonder if he's like responding when I say his name. So Uzi was, I remember Imp was on Samsung White, and they had just beaten RNG.
Yeah.
And Uzi looked like really, really frustrated on stage. Remember, like his team left and he was still sitting there, like face super red, clearly was really, really heated. And as he walked off stage, Imp and Uzi crossed paths, and Imp, he speaks Korean. I don't know if he speaks Chinese now, but he only spoke Korean at the time. And Uzi obviously speaks Chinese, so they can't really conversate. But Imp was like Uzi. And Uzi looked at him and was like, you're number one ADC, you're the best. And I was like, this is such a cool moment, right? Because these are like two guys who were like at the top of their field. And for one of them to explicitly call out the other and be like, you're the best, even though he had just been beating him, I thought that was one of my coolest moments to get to witness backstage.
Yeah, and those are the kinds of things that the general fandom won't really have access to unless somebody shares it later, right? Like the kind of the
Mhm.
semi-private moments between the players, or the things that they kind of think behind what they put forward on the stage and like show to the cameras. I think that kind of thing, it brings so much humanity. I think to the players, especially the players who who don't speak the same language as that chunk of the audience, right? Like I think you used to get this a lot with just the Korean players in general, like, oh, they have no personality, right? Because
Mhm.
and to some extent it was because you didn't get to see them in their own environment speaking in the same language as you, and anything translated loses a lot of its humanity up front. But then also just, the things that they put forward on the camera versus the things that they are willing to do kind of, semi backstage or fully backstage are just so different. So that's a pretty interesting story, and I think especially the profile people would expect from Uzi would not necessarily fit with that kind of the humility, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think they wouldn't expect it from Imp either, right? Because Imp is the
Right.
one, who he thought he was the best, and he was giving a compliment to another guy, and I think everyone considered Uzi the best. Like everyone's like, this guy's a prodigy, but he wasn't on winning teams, which is the saddest story ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was such a cool moment to witness.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's move on to what's going on today. What's going on now? What's coming up next? We are heading into MSI,
Mm.
and I'm working on my prep for it. I don't know if you're involved on any level, but I'm sure you're getting excited for the event as well. What are some of your expectations for the event? What do you think? How is this all going to play out?
Yeah.
Whichever part of that you're most interested in.
So I'll talk about things mostly from a North perspective.
Sure.
It's funny, and I'm formulating some thoughts on like NA. We have almost not a victim complex, but this like self-hating. It's gone beyond self-deprecation.
Yeah.
It's like this really ugly self-hating identity, or it's like we suck and we don't suck. It's like out of like 13 or maybe it's 12 regions now with OC getting merged with NA. It's top 4 region. That doesn't suck by any standard, but
Yeah.
sucks relative to expectations, right? Because NA is like one of the oldest regions, and people expect it to be up there with Europe, China, Korea. But I would argue there are lots of macro factors for why you actually just shouldn't expect that
Mm-hmm.
from the region. But all that aside, I'm actually really excited for C9. And the reason is I think I at the start of the split, I actually thought that TL would be the best team to send internationally. It's a team of veteran players. At the start of the split, I was like, these guys have top 2 players in each position. Do I still believe that? Well, Tactical didn't have a great split, but I
Yeah.
think going into the split, it was reasonable to say you would expect him to be top 2. And with C9, although they have Perks, who obviously is the most accomplished Western player, the greatest Western player ever, I still had some question marks around Fudge and his performance. But I think Fudge has really proven me, and I think a lot of the community wrong. I think the thing I was particularly impressed with Fudge is not so much the level he's currently playing at, but how quickly he got to that level over the
Mm.
course of the split. And the second thing I looked at is like, it's easy, when we look at memes like playoff perks, right? It's easy to forget the provenance of those memes. And the reason it's a meme is because like it's actually exceptional for a player to be that clutch and that consistently clutch under pressure. And when I think about going to an international event where it's a completely new environment versus some of the best players in the world, your entire region is put under a microscope. Like
Yeah.
when I think about the kind of person I wanted to be up there, it's Perks, right?
Yep.
And even if someone wants to argue that maybe pound for pound, TL has more talented players if they're all operating at their peak. I think that level of leadership and veterancy is really, really huge on the international stage. And I think, to be fair, we could always expect that. But now I feel more comfortable now that I've seen Fudge's development, and I can be more confident that, hey, I don't think this guy's going to get blasted by other top laners. I think he's going to be just playing a lot of weak side. We're going to be prioritizing picks like Sion, putting him in matchups where he's going to have value no matter what. And then I expect like Perks and Blaber to a similar extent to have huge pop-off performances. So look, I'm not going to go out here and say they're going to win the entire event, but we should, lest we forget, in 2019, NA did get to the finals, right?
Yep.
And they went through IG to do it. So it wouldn't be completely without precedent to have a finals finish. The reason I hold off from saying I think they're going to win is because, Damwon looks so damn good, right? And at the end of the day, C9 is still a new roster. So I'm keeping my expectations tempered because I don't think they've been subject to this much heat. And MSI is like a completely different furnace. So overall, I'm optimistic. I don't think there's going to be a bad showing. I think maybe I'm 100% confident they're going to get out of the group stage. Depending on like a bit of bracket luck, they might go as far as finals. They might not. I think the way it works is they can't get matched with Damwon round one in the bracket because they're in the same group, which is actually a huge boon.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's actually really beneficial for the same group as them now. So I would encourage any fans whether the first matchup, even if Damwon smashes C9, I don't think that's going to be indicative of how the tournament's going to go for C9. And overall, I'm feeling pretty bullish on them.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially when you refer back to like the TL run to the finals, and to beat IG there only took I think a modest amount of underperformance from IG, and TL playing their best day, and it can happen in a tournament like MSI compared to Worlds where there's such a larger field. And you have to have a lot more things go right to get to the semis or the finals. At MSI, you only have to win one BO5, right? Finish top 4 in the Rumble stage now. Still a bit of an interesting name. And then win one BO5, which anybody, I still very firmly believe that anybody can win a BO5 against anybody under the right circumstances, once we're all at this level of play. And if you don't have to, like, if you do have to face down one, that's going to be really tough. But I think especially, like, I'm doing my prep on RNG right now. Like, yeah, this team's pretty beatable. They have a lot of skill, but they're pretty beatable. Mad Lions coming in, they don't, they're still figuring out some new pieces of their roster. I don't see them coming in. I don't have that G2 vibe, right? Like, they don't have that mental edge of, how do we beat G2? It's Mad Lions, These are guys that you should feel like you're able to beat. So I definitely agree with that. I think C9 should come in on paper as the 4th team, because this is what NA has earned, but I don't look at any of those teams and go, C9, there's no way they can beat these guys. So
yeah, and look, as you noted, like MSI, by dint of format, is a high variance tournament, right? Yep. Like, it's not a coincidence that MSI has been NA's most successful tournament, right? Mm-hmm. They got to the finals twice. So yeah, I think we could see that again. And I'm not saying there's no chance they win the whole thing. As you noted, like, it's kind of an any given Sunday type of deal, but I think there would be long odds to beat them one. But yeah, I was really impressed with the possibility C9 showed, not just in draft, but actually just like the level ones they're willing to go for. Like the level 1 we saw them pull out in the final game versus TL was something where no one was expecting that, let alone in the last game. And they have a coaching staff that's sort of like, it's almost like a player-run organization in the sense that their coaches are former players themselves. So I think when you have that level of trust between the coaching staff and the players based on sort of a shared background, I think you have more willingness to do these kinds of things too. So I hope they do that. And I know they're not going to be boring, which is like at the end of the day, like the point of this sport is to be entertaining. So they're not going to go down without a fight.
That's for sure. I think one of the players that I'm very closely going to have my eyes on is Blaber, to see, I think he is in a lot of ways kind of the soul of the team, and the team plays around and through him quite a bit. And, him having won Spring Split, now he's won a couple of championships, he's won a couple of MVPs. I think there is some controversy to the idea that I put out a few weeks ago that I think he's on the track to become, one of, or potentially with a long enough career of success, greatest player, NA player of all time. Not saying he's there or close to it yet. Mm-hmm. But what do you see as Blaber's legacy so far in his career? What kind of trajectory do you think he's on?
I mean, right now, it's kind of hard to argue that he's not pound for pound the most successful NA player in the league right now, right? If you just look at the amount of time he's actually did and his level of accomplishment over those splits, right? He was rookie of the split. He's been MVP. He was champion last spring. He's champion this spring. He's MVP this spring, right? This is a very short period to have that achievement. Now,
Yeah.
this is not me saying he's the best NA player of all time,
No.
but if he continues at a clip even similar to this, he's certainly going to go down as one of the most decorated. And I think the thing is, like, especially, it's not just that he's been the best, but he's so clearly been the best when he's the best, right?
Yeah.
Like, he exerted absolute dominance over his position. And the only reason there was even a shadow of a debate about whether he should be MVP is because Alfari similarly showed incredible dominance over his role, like to an exceptional degree. I think that speaks volumes about the caliber, of Blaber as a player. So yeah, I mean, if he continues his trajectory, like how can you not look at this guy as in the running for one of the Western GOATs? The problem is he requires so much more time.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're comparing him to like Double Lift and Bjergsen, right?
Yeah, like 8-9 years of play. Yeah.
Exactly. And then Perks to a degree and maybe Core to a degree as well. So he just needs way more time. But yeah, I mean, it's hard if you just take the time that he's played up to this point and you compare it against a similar time interval against anyone else. Yeah, he stacks up pretty favorably.
How much do you think it matters performance in spring versus summer? Because, I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, that both of his titles and both of his MVPs have come in spring splits so far, right? Do you think that matters? Does it play into the story of his career at all?
I don't think it matters that much. I mean, look, there's this whole meme, spring split doesn't matter. And so one could argue that in at least the past, I mean, it matters more now because of the system, but one could argue in the past that maybe people tried harder during the summer. And I could see that. Like, look, we're humans, right? You have to manage your energy, and it's hard to be driving at 100% all year. And when the stakes are worlds, I think it's easier to get locked in. So I think there's something to that. Like, maybe this gets me in trouble, but like I am personally willing to argue that summer titles matter a little bit more than spring titles. I don't think it matters that much more. But I think when I look at Blaber's case in particular, I think what happened in summer was such an aberration from Cloud9's performance in the prior split that I don't really look at this as a case of, oh, this guy's like a spring split wonder or something like that.
Yeah.
I look at it more like, hey, circumstances transpired such that he was really good in last spring. His team was really good in last spring. They should have been good in summer, but it kind of fell apart. And now they're rebuilding, and I fully expect them to be top 2 going into this summer. So I don't think you're going to see a huge drop off, and I don't really view it as a big knock against him. Now, if in 6 years he's only winning springs, then it's a different conversation.
Yeah, like what if it's 2024, Blaber has won every spring split title and every spring MVP, but never won a summer or gone to Worlds? then we've got an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, has there ever been a player like? I mean, we know players so. Like what do they call it? The Score Award, or is it the Dade Award? No, Dade Awards for Worlds. I think it was Score who was constantly coming in second. Anyway, one of these memes. So it would be funny to have a meme of someone who only wins spring, but that's not a bad meme either. So I mean, if you're winning half of the titles that you can win domestically a year, it's not bad.
Yeah, it could be worse. You could, there are players that throughout the history of traditional sports who are like one of the greatest, players of all time, and they never won a title, right? Like in the NHL, I think that's where I'm most familiar. You got a player like Mike Gartner, who's one of the greatest goal scorers of all time, never won a Stanley Cup, but like he's still a great player who is very well remembered. At the same time, you have the players who go their whole career, are on this crazy career trajectory, and then finally win it in their last split, and you're like, oh, the Ray Bourque story for the NHL fans. But anyways, I think Blaber, seeing what he manages to do, I think the drop off last summer compared to the way that they started to fall off at the end of this spring split and brought it back for the playoffs, I think I think that becomes a big part of his storyline of his career so far, is that he's figuring out how to right the ship when it starts to go off course and how to keep himself focused and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm hopeful that we'll see more of that success. I think the way he plays, the quality of his play, and the success he's had so far put him on he's a player that you just have to keep watching and see how much longer he can keep doing this and how much he can achieve. So looking forward to seeing where that all goes, for sure.
Yeah. And I think it's noteworthy, like the growth trajectory for him, right? Like he's become a more versatile player who's learned to cap his downside a bit, as opposed to like this Olaf one trick, who the whole team is basically playing around. And I think he's shown I mean, his champ pool is immense relative to other junglers. And he also has a really lethal champ pool of champions that you just don't want to give him, even when they're not like the absolute best champ. Like Olaf actually comes to mind. Even when Olaf had slightly fallen off, it was still kind of permaban status versus him. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's just tough because, well, actually, it's not tough. I was gonna say it's tough because part of the GOAT discussion, regional GOAT, has to incorporate international results. But I mean, to be fair, Bjergsen has had no international results. He did get to an MSI final, but at Worlds he struggled a lot. So it wouldn't take that much international performance for Blaber to overtake them.
We do have that weird kind of dichotomy of NA players who either won a lot at home, like Doublelift and Bjergsen, or had relative international success, Jensen, Sneaky, people like that. I mean, Sneaky also won a lot at home in the earlier part of his career, but it is kind of strange that we have those. I think Jensen is the one who, especially coming in and winning those 2 titles in TL, he's got some balance of the two. But you have to weigh which of those matters more to you in these kinds of conversations, and that's just how it comes down.
It's tough, right? Because you have to look at the reasons why the performances vary. Like, one can make the argument that TSM was a less flexible team than Cloud9, historic TSM, by the way. Like Bjergsen era TSM was less flexible than Cloud9, and as a result, like when you get to international events and you're just playing standard, but you play it best in the region, that's not enough for international. Whereas C9 style introduces more variance and more chance of upset. And also, I do think there were some legitimate years where they did get a really tough bracket, like uncharacteristically tough relative to their seed. So for me, like, unless someone has a really astonishing international result, like you win a Worlds, despite never winning a domestic split, which would be crazy, and I'm sure there's someone who's done that. I think it is really difficult for me to look at a player who struggled to win domestically and be like, yeah, they're the best in their region, in their role, without there being significantly exculpatory circumstances. Like, so for instance, like Uzi, everyone agreed that I was like probably the best, outside of like, I don't know, like Wei Zhao, in his role, on average over the course of his time in LPL. But I don't think you could argue that for Jensen. You could argue there were times where he was better than Bjergsen, but I don't think you can argue that he was holistically better. So I do think domestic success really matters when pairing peers in the same league.
Yep, I think that's fair. Moving on from Blaber and some of these things, are there any other players whose careers that you've personally just really enjoyed following? Any kind of favorites who you've tracked over time?
Actually, it's Jensen. So the reason for me is part personal. So I remember when Jensen was incarnation, right, and he was notorious for his antics in solo queue, but he was also like an absolute monster, and there's many a Zed highlight reel of him just like styling on people in EU solo queue. I remember there was so much hype around, oh wow, this guy's gonna go pro, like this guy's like, it's kind of like a Caps narrative, but then he got banned, right? And I do think the ban was warranted in his behavior at the time, but I remember when I joined Riot, it was only like perma bans, basically. Like if you get banned, you're done. It's like one and done. And not to toot my own horn here, but I thought, as someone who's like, I actually got banned once, like for a week for being like solo queue. So yeah, I know what it's like. Like it's a hard game, like emotionally, mentally, and psychologically. And I understand like people misbehave and they're kids, right? So like people deserve some sort of path to redemption. So for me, I don't know. I felt one of the things I thought was having a big part in crafting that path to redemption and instating an appeals process. And I reviewed his case too. And we saw that he had grown a lot since then. So I don't know. It was gratifying to see someone for whom history could have gone another way, and he could have just been an eternal what if, like a guy who we saw YouTube montage reels of, and we never got to see play. And European then he got to play, and Sorry?
European Epto.
Exactly, European Apto. And then we saw him play, and he was quite good. Now, unfortunately, he was in the league with Bjergsen, right? So he wasn't the best, but he was really good. I think he was in many senses the genuine article as advertised. So it's been great to watch his story because he hasn't had an easy path, you know. And I think he's actually shown a lot of mental resilience because he had notable moments where he like fumbled the ball rather. And like the Echo misplay in the finals and stuff like this. And he keeps on going, and I think that's really right. That he seems, from all outward appearances, to be someone who has tunnel vision, focus on getting to where he wants to go instead of worrying so much about the narratives around him. And he had to shrug off the toxic reputation. Now he has to deal with this whole second best, always a bridesmaid, never the bride reputation. So yeah, I think he has a really textured and interesting story. And I hope at some point he gets at least a split where people can be like, yeah, he was the absolute best in his region at this point in time, because I don't think he's gotten that.
Yeah, and that's one of those just circumstantial things that you can't, what are you going to do about it? You just be the best you can be, and you can't control how good people are around you. But winning as a team is another way through that. I think he's had a lot of success as a team, and his role within those teams has been really high. And I don't think he's ever been outside of the conversation of good mid laners. Really, he's always been worth watching. So.
Absolutely.
Can't complain too much, but yeah, it would be. I think he's definitely put his time in, and still a player that TL feel like is worth building around. They gave him a big contract not long ago. I don't think he's going anywhere. So I'm definitely curious to see how he performs in the summer split. I think spring split this year was slightly quieter from him. Hard to say what reason that might be, but I think he still has an opportunity to do a lot in the summer split and see whether he can get back to Worlds, get a better bracket draw there, and so on. Find out what happens with it. But before we get into that idea of whether you think TL will get back to Worlds, I think we have to talk about one of the other teams that might be threatening them to try to keep them out, and that's 100 Thieves, because they've had some moves this offseason. They're the only ones so far who have really kind of made a shift in what they're bringing into the summer split. So the two moves for anyone who hasn't been following is they hired Reaper as their new head coach, and they let Zix go. And then they signed Abadage away from Schalke and Nilfir. And, who we're not sure whether Ryoma or Demonte is going to play in Academy or if one of them is going to be like go to the org or anything else, but they brought in Abadage, and presumably he's going to start in summer split. What do you think of these two moves? Which one of them is more interesting to you?
I think the Abadage move thing, it's really hard to have a perspective on the benefit of a coach swap, because at the end of the day, it's really amorphous what their impact is. It is important, but it's really hard to ascertain from an outsider's perspective. Like, hey, how much was Zix contributing or failing to resolve the problems that the team had? And how much do I think Reaper is equipped to resolve those issues, right? Because I see what the 5 players do on the Rift. I don't see what goes on in the background. So I think the mid upgrade was sorely needed, right? Like, if we look at the arc of this team, I mean, they started off really strong, and they had a style that I personally really liked, which revolved around playing to their strengths. And their strength wasn't having really good laning phase mid. It was more mid assisting side lane, going for spot lane dives and stuff like that. But I do think that limits your team fundamentally if you struggle in more standard scenarios and you're just constantly getting mid gapped in lane. So I think it's a great move by them to get a new mid laner. That said, I think there's 2 factors working against them. One, that I don't think 100 Thieves I don't think they looked like an exceptional team playing standard regardless. Like, I don't think there was anything particularly impressive about their macro play or how they trade or set up for objectives or their late game team fighting. And once they stopped doing like the early game, tower dives and side lane roams from mid, they looked like, a light version of TSM, TL, and C9 in a sense.
Yeah.
Or maybe, to be fair, more light version of TL and C9. I think they were more on par with TSM, but TSM leaned even harder into we're just going to there. Whereas I think 100 Thieves, they tried to make more active efforts early game. So I still think there's like a that takes time to craft and refine. I don't know if just summer split's going to be enough for them to
Yeah.
figure that out and overcome who I think the three favorites are which are in no particular order C9, TL, and TSM. Um, and the second issue is just they have a new set of players, right? Or sorry,
Yeah.
a new set of player and coach, and it takes time for all of that to get integrated. And I think that introduces just some variance into the equation that takes time to resolve. And again, I don't know if they have that time to resolve it. So I do think it's a stronger roster of 5 players on paper. I know Reaper is obviously extremely successful and effective coach, at least in the environments where he's been largely in the
His teams have
past. It's
won.
always different. Yeah, exactly. So I think in the long run, like by spring, I think you can start talking about them being top 3. But I do think they're a solid 4th. There's a chance they reach 3rd, but I think odds are against them.
Yeah, it's tough because it clearly they are making the biggest moves that they think they can, that they have access to, and they really want to get into that top 3 and go to Worlds. But it does set them behind to have this, to lack the head start, so to speak, that the other teams have, having played together. And we don't know for sure whether TSM might make a change. I think it'd be very unusual. Obviously, Cloud9's not going to change anything. TL, I can't really see why. I doubt they're going to make a bit of a shift. I think you look at tactical and say, they're just going to give him some time to play himself back in. That's what I would expect. And maybe they'll make a change for next year. But 100 Thieves do now have to play catch up on their team coordination, their team prep, and I think they already had some issues with that, especially when you look towards the top side, and Someday and Closer just never seem to be on the same page, and now they got to incorporate another player into that. And in fairness, they were switching back and forth, or just really back one time between Demonte and Ryoma. So they already kind of playing catch up at some certain points in their kind of team synergy, but now they've hit a little bit of reset on that again. I think Reaper has his work cut out for him to make those 5 work together really well. But
exactly, yeah, and you made a really good observation. That's a shame that they haven't been able to work well together. That should be a really strong point for 100 Thieves, like their top lane.
Yeah.
Although toward the end, he got outlaned by I think Huni outlaned him in playoffs and stuff. So Sunday was a solid, definitely above laner, pretty much all year. So there's no reason in principle that if you don't get the correct synergy between him and Closer, that he can't become someone who's a genuine carry force every single game. But unfortunately, a lot of top lane is how your jungler interacts with you, and if you're not on the same page, it's not even like a matter of your jungler's bad. It's just like if you're not coordinated, you're not going to look as good as you should. So yeah, the team has a lot of work to do in terms of figuring out where they want to coordinate. I mean, look, I wouldn't be surprised if they're like, look, let's just full send bot, like we're going to focus on FBI and Hui every single game, because they were good all split. But yeah, they do have to figure that out, and it just takes time.
And I think they should do that, honestly, because I think they have enough time that they could try to see if they've kind of resolved their top side issues. But I also think that what you're going to get if you play to the bot side, and now you have the strongest mid laner Someday has played with in North America. I don't think there's much question to that. He's been playing with kind of gaps in his mid lane, relatively speaking. Not, he hasn't had a Bjergsen or a Jensen to play with like some of these other guys have had. And now you actually have a player who, even if Abadage doesn't come in, he's no caps, he's no perks, but he's a good player. He's a really good, solid all-around mid laner. And I think that's something Someday hasn't really had. And so even if you don't have the best opportunity to make Someday a strong point and give him carries and so on, I've argued for a long time that I think his career profile has been strongest on tanks and engage play and utility. And if you can have Abadage in your mid lane, who is a reliable control mage carry, and you have FBI who will, crush his lane and give him all the resources and he'll carry, all you need Someday to do is play Sion and weak side Gnar and get some flanks off. And the other 2 guys, you actually have 2 carry threats now, not just 1, right? So, I think they probably should just play to the bot side and do the standard 5v5 scaling kind of a thing. But we'll see if that's what Reaper thinks, I guess.
Yeah, we'll see. And I think that the nice thing about from outward appearances, he works really well with the strengths of his particular group of 5 dudes. So if it turns out that like, hey, look, the move is to focus on team fighting and putting someday on type champions, then I'm sure Reaper will do that. But if he's like, hey, like, I actually think we should be looking for someday on carries and sort of modify the team style a little bit more, I think he'll be keenly aware of that as well. So I honestly don't have an opinion on what the best way for them to play is. Like, I sort of have to see them as a unit. But I think the point is they have more skill to work with overall.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that this was. You can't claim it's a sideways move or anything like that. Like, they upgraded. I think if anybody has issues with the move, it might be because they think it costs too much or something like that. But I don't think anybody's going to look at this and say Abadage doesn't improve their team on paper, at least, right? So we'll see what they manage to pull off. But it seems like you still feel C9, TL, TSM are the favored 3 to get to Worlds at the end of summer.
I do. For me, I think it's still C9, TL top 2. It's hard for me to get a read on which one of those will won. Fortunately, we were robbed of TL at full strength, although Armeo did a good job, obviously, but still, it's different with Santorin. And I was expecting TL to win the split overall, and I was wrong. And I think I discounted just how ridiculously potent Perks is relative to like everyone in his role when push comes to shove. But yeah, I think it's going to be those guys top 2, because the outside factor is near the end where I think he got it together. I don't think he's quite as good as he's been in the past, and I don't think Core was either. And not to say Core was bad, but Core was like godlike before, and he wasn't godlike this split. So
he was just very good.
Sorry,
he was just very good. Maybe even very, very good.
Very good. Exactly. So at full strength, it's really, really good.
Yeah, and I went both directions, right? Like, I started off, once the rosters were fully assembled, I started off being on the C9 train. By the end of the spring split, I had actually come around to the Team Liquid side of it. And, in the full-on bracket predictions video we did for Run It, I actually called out TL and said, I think they're going to do it. I think C9 is dropping the ball here. And then I came back around to C9 by the time the playoffs had been partway through. But like, I think that just goes to show that both of these teams have so much to offer, and just hoping to see them play more matches and more BO5s and so on.
I think your trajectory of predictions is totally reasonable, right? Like, you update your view based on what you're seeing, and empirically, like, Fudge was really bad in lock-in, right? TL looked really good in lock-in. Perks did not look particularly good, but he looked okay. Not as good, obviously, as we were expecting, but I think it was most people's expectations that he would be at a really high level by the end of the year. But honestly, I think the big story for C9 was how much Fudge improved relative to where he was before. So yeah, I think it's fine to have flip-flopped opinions. I hate the term flip-flop, by the way. It's like the antithesis of having an open-minded and empirical view.
Yeah, can't argue with that one. And on the Fudge point, I've been hyping up Fudge for a long time now, so I think that partly explains also why I was so high on C9 back in December. It's because Fudge was my guy, and he's proving that my faith is well placed. So I feel good about that one, and I will take all credit for every piece of success he has in the rest of his career.
There you go. Credits off to you.
This is what it is. So we have some listener questions. These are possible to submit on Patreon, patreon.com/oracleselixir. People can put those in advance when I kind of post who the guest is going to be. And also, if you're watching live on Twitch while we record this, you can throw in questions there as well. So there's a question from Joao Barros, who wants to know which North American org has the most talent across all of their teams at all levels, so LCS, Academy, Amateur. I'm not sure how much of an opinion you have on this one, whether you've been able to follow the kind of below LCS level or not.
My default response is always going to be most robust support for their academy team. And it's really, really close between their LCS teams, between TL and C9 at the LCS level. So my default is generally going to be C9, but I don't follow academy that close. So it's hard for me to be like, hey, I look at this individual player and I think they're better than the next person in their position. But I think generally speaking, across even not just the split, but like the past several splits, it's probably been C9.
Yeah, and I
And
think
it's also a testament to how robust that team's infrastructure is at raising talent. There's several former C9 Academy players who are at the LCS level right now.
yeah, it depends a little bit how you look at this question, right? Because when you talk about the amount of talent, you might be asking, prospects, who has the most kind of prospects who might become really good in the future versus, just current level of play is kind of the way you always look at things at the academy and below level. So when you look at C9 Academy and they've got Darshan playing quite well, they've got King, who is, probably the best bot laner in academy right now. It's between him and Luger. They've got these players who are really strong, but aren't necessarily in that kind of prospects category because King has this long Oceanic career. Darshan obviously has been around a long time. It just depends a little bit how you look at it. My answer on this would probably be Evil Geniuses, personally. When you look at what they have in Academy, they have what I would probably call the strongest prospect in the system right now in Jojo Pian, just given his trajectory and how young he is and how much he's already been able to achieve. They have Contract, who is an LCS level jungler. They've got some other players who are quite good, and then they've also got their amateur team, who has some players on there that are going to be really, really great in a year or two as well. So they're the org that I would look at, but that's because I'm leaning more towards the prospect side of that equation, right? Whereas I think your answer is referring more to the kind of the current level of play. So it depends how you approach that. I think 100 Thieves are worth shouting out as well. They've got some pretty good stuff in the works. And they have Luger.
Interesting. So wait, Tim, can you repeat the question? Was the question all like across the organization, like LCS, amateur, and academy?
Yeah, the most talent across all their teams.
Interesting. And you think it's EG, despite, I mean, they have a reasonably talented, but it feels like they're clearly at least a tier below C9 TL, probably.
Yeah. See, because my answer is definitely weighting LCS a lot lower than the other parts of it, right?
Got it. Okay.
Because if you depending how much of that equation you put the LCS skill level into, like, yeah, they don't have the most skill at the LCS level. They're top 5, but yeah, I definitely I'm definitely giving them a lot more value in my answer to the academy and amateur side of it, for sure.
Interesting.
So again, it just depends which parts you put into it. I think EG have the strongest talent pipeline coming up, but they don't have the strongest LCS team on its own, right? So, Joao, depending on what you were looking for from that answer, I think we've approached it a couple different ways.
Yeah, and thanks for the question, Joao.
Smax wants to know how excited you are for hopefully doing the LCS in studio again whenever that's ready to happen. And also whether you have any specific content ideas in the works that you're able to share.
Smax, I'm so excited. It actually kind of sucks to do remote broadcast because ideally, when you're doing at least the analyst desk segment, it's a conversation to be broadcast. And the problem was when you do this stuff online, you're like, we have like this system where we're like typing, periods in Discord so that people don't talk over each other and you can't read people's body language at all. So it was such a joy to get to do the analyst desk live at the Greek Theater because it's just much more natural. Like there's just way more verbal and nonverbal information that's coming toward you. That's easier to process and just be more natural, right? Yeah. And for me, it was my first time doing any kind of commentary or for League of Legends. So to be introduced into a remote environment was really rough. So excited. I think it's gonna be like 5 times more fun personally. And I'm also just excited to like be around humans. Like not fun to be quarantined. I'm like the loneliness is totally getting to me of not like being around people, at a daily basis, right? You don't realize how much that's impacted you until you've done that for a year.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, can you repeat the second question again?
Just whether you have any ideas for like content segments that might work there that didn't work remotely that you're hoping you'll be able to pull off.
Yeah, so for me, it's interesting. I know I don't really think of myself as an analyst, and I'm sure many people in the community be like, you're definitely not an analyst. And I don't think, it's funny because when Riot approached the opportunity, I told them like, hey, I'm not gonna like what's interesting to me about the esport is not so much like the technical analysis of what's going on the Rift and like itemization and these sorts of things. I much more care about narrative, which I know feels weird in this community, but it's actually pretty typical in sports. Like if you watch any traditional sports broadcast, they're much more talking about, you know, the player narratives and the surrounding drama that's part of the human emotional experience. So I want to do more content around that. One thing I'm thinking of doing in the more immediate future is just like then this would be self-directed, not like a Riot thing. It's just a video about fans. Because as I mentioned at the top of the show, I think fan culture, at least in North America, could be way healthier. The way the sort of way we regard our own region, the way we react to loss, these things. So yeah, I just know more talk. I more like talking big picture. That's why talk shows like this are fun for me because it's more long form. Whereas analyst desk, unfortunately, you're forced to limit your thoughts to like a small period of time, and you're sharing your time with all these other people, and you have the game that you do need to react to immediately. So yeah, that's my general view on it. In terms of like specific LCS content that's going to happen in the summer, I'm not sure, but stuff more in that vein is what I personally want to do.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of space for that, and I think that's something that, especially I think when analysts talk to each other, they tend to hone in on like, oh, and this is the stuff I'm really interested in, and if I'm interested in it, then the viewers will be too, which is true to some extent, right? Like you want to be authentic in the stuff you're excited about, your excitement will come through. But I think there's this huge portion of the fan base and the viewer base that just needs to know what are the storylines here? What are the things to get excited about? This person's on this trajectory, and you don't have to have the super crisp detail and all the edges of that. It's you're trying to get the main flow and the main theme of what's coming across here and tell that story, because it is in the end all about storytelling. Like a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today has been about the player who only ever did this but could never reach goal B. Like what if Blaber only ever wins spring and never wins a summer title? Like that's a storyline, and that kind of fuzzes over the edges of the actual things he did in game to get there. But the broad storyline over multiple years becomes so much more interesting on its own, right?
Exactly. And I think if we want this thing to grow, we need to realize that the majority of people, when they're watching sports, they care more about the narrative and the human piece, right? So if like, for me, the ideal is like this, we're not talking about like, you reached, X million people for the finals. We should be talking about tens or hundreds of millions of people, right? And when you're talking about that scale, you really need commentary that's broadly accessible, right? And that's going to be generally more coming from the heart than the head. So yeah, that's where I would like to more, focus discussion. For me, my favorite segment that we actually, segments that I was involved in that we did this split was talking about trash talk. So, it was after Fudge had made the brainless comment, and we had a discussion about like, hey, what is appropriate when it comes to trash talk? What's an example of good trash talk? And, do we want players doing more of this? And for me, that's like a really interesting, more meta discussion around how things are going, and is more memorable for me in particular. But again, like that's why we have a diverse array of perspectives that we put on the desk, ideally, because not everyone's gonna, as you said, not everyone's the same thing. Like there are people on the analyst desk who are much better than me at the technical analysis, and they love that stuff, right? And we should continue to have both.
Yeah, and people can seek out the types of content. Like I think when it's on the main broadcast, then you do have to be a little more careful about balancing out and having a little bit of everything for everybody kind of thing. But for the really, more niche stuff, if people really want to find out just about storylines, there are places they can go for that. If people really want to get into the details of game analysis within itself, I mean, to some extent, you go to co-streams for that. If you just want to go and hear people flame other people, there are also a lot of co-streams for that. Maybe that's up your alley. Maybe it isn't.
They're one and the same.
Sometimes they appear to be one and the same, but are actually not. But anyways, different strokes for different folks, and I think having a lot of variety for people to find the things that resonate with them is a good thing. One last question we'll go into here, and this is from Ravish. Wondering how you feel about standard analyst desk formats and how analyst desks can be more than just filler content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it goes back to what I said earlier about what kinds of conversations and takeaways do we want people to have. Because here's a challenge, right? Like you need to serve different audiences with this interstitial content, and it's really difficult to do that when you have a limited period of time, right? Yeah. Like in one sense, if we had an hour in between games, and I'm not advocating for an analyst desk in between games, you would actually get a much better analyst desk, right? Because then you could actually go deep where long form discussion is required, as opposed to each of us just giving a hot take. And you could get the analysis in, but of course that would make the entire thing way too long, and people are, they should be there to watch the games. So I honestly don't know what the solution here is. In my opinion, we should go more narrative heavy though with the analyst desk. So it's not just like a breakdown of what people saw, because I think there are audiences of people who, again, like they're just not watching the main broadcast to get breakdowns. Like, so we need to be bringing something different. And I think, in my opinion, and I hope I don't get flamed for this, probably geared a little toward more the casual audience who it's there. It's like the end of their day. They didn't come for like super serious, hardcore, let's break down this rotation, at 7 minutes around Dragon. And they more want to talk about, and they don't watch every single game. Right. So they're looking for us to be the storytellers and let them know, hey, what are the interesting, good things going on in the scene? Like, why do I care about these players beyond just the thing they did in particular in that game? Or how does this performance track against the perception of this player, or things they said before the game? Or, how does this affect how we view this player's rating against all the other players in their position in the league? I think we should be talking more about that personally, because I think it's really easy and I'm guilty of it too, like as someone who now it's my job to watch every single game, but even when I first got into the scene, I was watching every single game and most of the EU games. And I don't think that's like how most people engage with this kind of stuff, right? So you need to give them the minimally effective dose of content that gives them the big picture understanding of what's going on in the league and a reason to care.
Yeah, like an example could be, going into the finals talking about Fudge and Alfari, and like, hey, Alfari is the raid boss top laner, and Fudge is the not technically a rookie but feels like a rookie, coming in, and how is it possibly going to be able to match up? And then you don't necessarily have to talk about, hey, he's managing his 6th minion wave to do this, like I did on Run It, because that's for a different audience. On the broadcast, you can be like, hey, Fudge is David versus Goliathing this thing, and look how exciting that is. This young guy has taken on this veteran dominant force, and you don't have to talk about the exact details of how he did it, but focus on the fact that, hey, this is huge, especially with the trash talk he's done, and he's backing it up, and he's overcoming his demons kind of thing. I think you can do a lot with that.
Yeah. And I think the thing we have to recognize, you can't please everyone all the time.
Yeah.
Right? You have to find different ways to reach people. So I think the content you do on Run It it's fantastic, right? And instead of looking at this as like, hey, the broadcast needs to provide everything, instead what we should be doing, and I think this is what the internal team at Riot has been doing with their focus on, trying to bring interviews from journalists in the community, and I think we should be pushing more of your content. We should be driving people to different places that satisfies whatever particular appetite they have, and then figure out, okay, for the stock experience that the widest array of people is going to be experiencing, what is the widest array of people tend to gravitate to? And I'm not sure that we've hit that balance quite yet, but I do think they're working on it, and I think the changes that they've made to the AD this year relative to last year hopefully starts to demonstrate progress in the right direction. But
yeah, and I think the emergence of co-streaming being such a big thing is taking a step and shifting that balance as well, and figuring out how does this all fit together. How do we make sure that we're kind of the central part, and if you don't fit into that kind of central overview audience group, that you've got something else. And a lot of pieces to figure out, but I think it's going in a very interesting direction, and we'll see what happens with the LCS broadcast and what other regions are doing and so on. over time. But I think that's the time we've got for today. Thank you very much for joining me on the show today, Primal. What is the best way for people to follow your work?
So yeah, you can just follow me on Twitter. DMs are open. And yeah, you be expecting more content from me soon. It's going to be different from what a lot of other people are doing. I don't expect it to necessarily appeal to the mass audience, but I'm just trying to put out authentic signals that resonate with the people who want to hear them. So thank you so much for having me as a guest. I've really enjoyed that, and thanks to the callers for the questions.
Yeah, and make sure that links to Primal's social media and other things like that are available in the show notes. So check that out, and you'll be able to find it through that. And so best of luck with you making that content and with your continued presence on the analyst desk.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for everybody listening in. You can support the TrueSight podcast at patreon.com/Oracle's Elixir. You can subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server, where we talk about League of Legends, esports, other games, data science, a lot of other topics. And links for all of those will be in the show notes as well. This has been the TrueSight podcast, and I'm Tim Sevenhuisen. Thanks for listening.